Everyone, Stephen Lowisz here with GTM Secrets. Everything go to market, sales, marketing, RevOps, data, you name it. Probably had somebody on talking about it. Today I have Russell Wojcik on the line. And Russell, you specialize in the area that I suck at more than anything in life with content. But do you mind giving a little bit of background on your firm?
Sure. And kudos to making a great podcast because that's great content right there. So some credit. But yeah, I'm senior content marketing manager for Liquibase, which is a company in the database software, database DevOps space. I've been around for a while and really helping you kind of re-energize and modernize there. So I come from a background of SaaS and technical content marketing, but I actually started in more of a kind of a split between B2B and B2C, doing SEO and content marketing and conversion rate optimization. And then even going back into some PR agency days where I was handling more of a pitch strategy and media kits and things of that nature. So I kind of risen from that, brought a lot of those philosophies and learnings with me. And yeah, today I'm really focused on creating content that really resonates with a few of our key personas and serves the business and also kind of inspires and builds brand and all that fun stuff we like to aspire to.
Love it. I am definitely a marketing tech nerd. I mean, I own a company that does marketing. It's a MarTech platform. Content, branding, anything creative, just not my forte. So my first question, what does a day in the life of a content marketer look like? And let me preface that by saying, AI is taking over. There's a lot of crap content out there. People are pumping out 25 blogs a day, etc. Like, what does a day in the life look like for you? And then I'll dovetail that with, there's 100, if not more, DevOps platforms out there. Mm-hmm. How do you create content that stands out from anybody else?
Cool. Yeah, great question. So first, day in the life, I think, I think I am, I have the benefit of being in a kind of niche within a niche of B2B tech, where it's developer focused, but it's also DevOps and database and all these other very technical areas. And I say that because AI, it isn't used the same way in this category as maybe in, B2C or just other maybe high volume industries, things like that, where, I think us as content and other marketers can spot AI content pretty easily, but product listing descriptions, things like that, that's a great use of AI and spitting things out. No one's going to bother too much if there's maybe a lack of personality there. But when we get into industries like this one, where subject matter expertise isn't just like a nice to have, but it's like the foundation on which the content is built, AI is much less of a volume play type thing and much more of like an editorial assistant and a research assistant and an organizational assistant, helping with QAing or helping reframe things, helping retell messages as through the lens of different personas, things like that. So I see it as more of that kind of assistant that I actually need to put as much into as I get out of it in terms of training it, feeding it content, giving feedback. I use ChatGPT and similar as an experiment as a favorite, but much more of, I think, an accelerator in a way to fill gaps in workflow or team process or things like that. So in terms of, day in the life, it's a segment, but I think in terms of the media hype around it, it's a little bit overblown, and there's plenty of work to do without opening any AI tools. And I think strategy and finessing strategy or looking back at metrics to kind of understand what's going to come next, especially in this beginning of the year time frame, and also having conversations with these subject matter experts, and pulling those insights together to just build the content. There's so much going in there in terms of we're, again, saying things that meet our personas perspectives and doing it in a way that's not just kind of rehashing what information that's already out there through a SERP scrape or an AI, written post, but kind of creating something new, taking a new perspective and saying, there's your problem. This would be our take on it. Or, this is the kind of philosophy we're pushing. To your other question there, I think, how do we stand out in a big, enormous forest of DevOps tools and any tool adjacent to that? This is something that's come up, even from like a business level, is we really see ourselves as a source of wisdom for the industry. We have I see myself as having the privilege of walking into a company that's been around for, over a decade and that helped found this category. It's it's a kind of a position I've had at a previous company as well, and being in that sort of category creation or niche category growth position. And that, there's benefit in there, and that our perspectives and our philosophies are kind of inherently a little bit different than what you're hearing elsewhere. And so leaning into that and saying, we are this collective of wisdom that we want to tap and kind of activate to help our audience, which in this case includes our customers, but also an open source and a broader community and the DevOps and the database and the tech world in general. Layers to that and different ways to hit that with different content. But, that, and then I think what I mentioned, or I'll mention later, I'm leaning into more is just repurposing and distribution and, getting in front of people in different ways and with variations on the same message, or in our case, getting in front of different people on the team. And that's another way to to think about engagement, not just as this one person or this one persona, but spreading your net a little wider to think of the whole buying group along the sales cycle, can help kind of rein that in too.
So if I think about a good content strategy, and again, I'm a novice. Usually I have people on where I can talk to man gen and tech and RevOps and data, and I'll nerd out with them. You're educating me. So if I think about a good content strategy, I assume that you have to, think about SEO and keyword optimization. You have to think about the persona, where in the funnel it actually is going to be distributed, etc. And then you have quality, whereas AI is just pumping out what's already been written. How do you balance all of those? I mean, it seems incredibly difficult. I can imagine that you can match the persona and sales cycle, but then, and maybe I'm wrong, you have to stuff it with keywords. Like, how do you manage all of that?
For sure. Yeah. That's kind of an ongoing question, I think. And as a content marketer, that's kind of always the question too. Right now, I think it's a stranger answer than we've had before, given everything that's gone on with AI overviews in search and things like that. And it makes me rethink the value of a keyword to the business and to my strategy, balanced against the value of a really specific persona question or something I can put in the hands of my sales team that they're going to put in the hands of a prospect. It's recalibrating all those conversations. So what I like to do, and what I also want to lean into more, is again the concept of repurposing and a distribution. We think about it from a thought leader perspective. When I have time to sit down with our VP of product or one of our co-founders and we have a conversation, I try to think about that from multiple perspectives of, can we answer a journalist pitch with this and get some thoughts down that we could send over to him or her? Can we also spin that out into a blog post or some kind of content for our own website and newsletter and social? Then can we also use that to enhance keyword focused content? So maybe we're talking about the topic over here, and to help us stand out in the SERPs and to help us give more to our audience, we bring some of that thought leadership in. I think you have to kind of not try to do too much with one thing and then keep things separate. Even, when you think about your offsite content, thinking about the value of a really great article with no brand mention, some great links back to your site and some great audience exposure. Compare that to something that maybe has your brand, but it's up on a mainstream publication that's just, going to bounce off 99% of the audience and only land with maybe a very tight 1% with the cachet of that thing. So there's a lot of things to balance there. And it also comes down to business priorities as well. Are you in a position where you can throw a ton of leads at a sales team that's really going to crush them? Are you in a position where just nobody knows your brand and you really need to invest in offsite authority and awareness? Usually there's something in the middle. But yeah, SEO especially has become, I've been reprioritizing it a lot lately, and that doesn't mean I haven't invested plenty of time and effort and energy and will continue to do so, especially because, tangentially, I also can see how it influences the chat GPTs and other AI tools of the world, and how we're kind of shifting from maybe search engine optimization to just a discoverability and AI engine optimization, something there. So I think keeping a flexible approach, but kind of just anchoring in where am I getting value and how are these people finding me? And not trying to do too much with one thing. I think the same approach of a landing page applies to any other content you're creating.
Makes sense. Just out of curiosity, I haven't had anyone give me a straight answer. Is there a science, kind of like Google search, right? There's a science to ranking and an art, sure.
Right.
Do you know the science to ranking for Chat GPT or Gemini or any of those? Is there one, or is it like who the hell knows?
Yeah, I think to the best of my understanding, not that I claim to have a great understanding, but following the industry, understanding some of the underlying technology. For instance, just by nature being in the database space, I've done some research and content, vector databases and AI ML models, things like that, talk to our co-founders, having some of all that insight. It's, it's all about the information going into it. And that's why I say, I think about it maybe similarly to search engine optimization. The model's being trained on something. So where are you showing? We've seen that there's a lot of similarities to how a search engine is working and finding and crawling and understanding information. So if you take that same mindset, it's probably going to pay off. I think it also lends to, again, the importance of publishing offsite and beyond your own website, because we also know that they look to some of the biggest publishers, but also niche publishers. I mean, there's so much happening and so much that's not solidified around what they should be allowed to learn from. You can think of too as how you use the LLMs themselves, depending on if you allow them to be trained by your own work, what they learn from that. I don't think there's a lot of experimentation going on, but I think, again, going back to a more value-rooted sense that it will be found, and you're if you give the important value, I think that's what's going to attract it. And that's what's going to help it stand out. And that's also what's going to help it maybe call out your brand or your specific presence in answers. Again, the privilege of having a brand with some history, you might already be seeing this as you jump into ChatGPT and the like. You might be, especially now that it's feeding back links, you might be getting links to your own website. And it's great to see that, whether that content's recent or a couple of years old, and how that's all falling, I think is, again, all changing. But what I'm very curious about is how we're going to handle the concept of AI that's now trying to learn from AI generated content, and how we're going to solve that. I think there's a million questions, and it's probably some kind of cycle where we're going to come back to a lot of more organic and personally rooted things. So that gets into conjecture, but
no, I
think about your customers and your thought leaders, and where they converge is probably where you're going to get.
Makes sense. So, okay, that does make sense. Now, as a content marketer, how are you directly measured? Is it going to be based on traffic? Is it leads generated by your content? I imagine it's a mix of all sorts of things. Like, what are the key metrics that you're focused on?
Yeah, another great question, and one that I've seen kind of evolve over the last year or so too. I think, it depends on the business and the leadership in place on your team at the business level, on the sales team, all of that. There's a lot of dynamics at play, but I measure myself, and I think holistically I measure presence as a content entity. And there's different ways. So, I think it's, if you can directly go into the sales process and say, these content assets are influential to our deals, or they are creating new contacts for us that end up being valuable, that's your best bet. So there's many ways to do that. If you have good marketing data or a good markups person, they can definitely help you. Talking directly to the sales team helps with that as well. I think some of the classic metrics around, website traffic, engagement, all of that's still important, still things I measure, look at pages, look for trends and keyword and topic strategy, insights, all of that. But it has been weird recently, with so much, for instance, seeing, your impressions soar because people are seeing you in AI overviews, but not clicking through because the journey is so different. There's a shift in, what's being measured, but kind of, I guess, the weight that's carrying. So some of those formerly leading indicators are now some of the primary ones, because I can say, hey, I know that I'm showing up in these AI overviews for this really core concept. I don't quite know what's happening next. And that's the tricky part. But yeah, so those all ladder up to leads, I think, into revenue. And so we want to look at conversion improvements and engagement improvements. But I've found that having a lot of those really focused conversations of, we've created this great journey, or we've created these certain assets that have accelerated or created sales opportunities, has been really valuable to our organization. And kind of having a mindset of sales enablement behind almost every content piece that's out there, or customer enablement to that sense, because we're in a very, think most industries like us are very much in a customer growth mindset, just as much as we are a new business and sales mindset. Those, I think, are some of the most truthful and reliable places to kind of set your set.
Makes sense. Got it. Now, you kind of hit on something that is a tough topic, which is attribution. So I understand if somebody comes to a blog and then opts in or fills out a contact or demo form or signs up in your case, that's easy for attribution, fairly easy. But when you're talking about using assets throughout the sales cycle, how the hell do you attribute revenue to that?
Yeah. And that, again, I think, similar to other things, it's like something we're constantly chasing. A couple of years ago, it was like the deprecation of cookies and all these things that was throwing a wrench. And, about how much data you can collect and treat as first party data, I think is important. So layering your attribution and analytics softwares, I think helps. I think analytics attribution is, I don't want to say a gap, but somewhere I've leaned heavily on people who have really strong knowledge of analytics, of attribution tracking, setting those things up and helping us understand those gaps. So layering those in and go ahead.
But by the way, for those listening, Russell was also on the Masset, MASSET podcast. They're trying to go down that route and be able to solve that problem, but I haven't met anybody that has been able to as of yet.
And I think it's a multifaceted problem. I think you can look at some other organizations, and I've talked to some of these folks that have come from organizations like an Adobe or Facebook or one of the really large corporations that also have really large ecosystems where so much of their customers' journey might actually happen within their own ecosystem. But that's another option as well. When you have your own community or you have your own support portals, your own product as well, those are all options or opportunities, I should say, for engagement and attribution. I think getting creative, partnering with those folks that can help you get creative from their end, with the technical side of tracking and attribution. And being open to new technologies, that can help identify who's on your website, for instance, even if you can't maybe directly tie them to a piece of content or a deal. If you can show that certain accounts, certain industries, or certain personas are frequenting your site more, that's another way that you can kind of attribute content or content activity or content authority to business or sales related metrics and say, here we're attributing content to this. And it might not be one-to-one, but it's direct and it's clear.
Got it. Makes sense. So content's great and content's super important, but it becomes useless if there's no distribution. And distribution could be me being a sales rep, send it to a current account, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But distribution at scale, tell me if I'm wrong, you're really talking about SEO, even if you want to play the video game like YouTube, etc. You're talking about social media, so on and so forth. In such a niche, maybe it's not even niche because there are so many DevOps. It's niche, and at the same time, you have a lot of competition in DevOps. What are some of the better distribution channels that you have found for getting the awesome content that you write out there?
Yeah, good question. And one, I'm doing more research into, this year as part of my strategy, kind of my reinvestment in distribution and repurposing. It's also one that I'm lucky to have an incoming event manager to help with, a developer relations position, some others that I'm kind of working with to explore more organic feeling distribution, that's more one-to-one, more kind of almost in a sense. But, the ones you mentioned are most important. And, that's been some of the trickiest is getting content enabled, and it's as much a process of enabling sales or anyone within your organization about not just, they have to know not just the product and the messages, but the content and the larger context of this. And so that's a lot to put on them as much as it might be a lot to put on your audience. So having those feedback loops, I think is really helpful, and understanding is distribution, through sales, for example, a method that's working. Is what you're giving them working? Is the context around it what you're giving them working? Looking to the other channels, to say, Is it worth me posting on multiple social platforms, or should I just, kind of target into the one that's actually getting me 90% of the referral clicks? Also look at, which audiences are in which platforms, and even think about it. The DevOps space is packed with products that all sort of go after the same broad group of people, but it's almost less so a persona competition than a use case competition or a use case story, or sort of a, specific niche context story. So it's kind of finding ways or finding the places where that context or that challenge or that use case is showing up, and that might be in a forum or on Reddit or somewhere more tactical than where you're typically thinking about broader DevOps concepts, or, where you see a lot of activity anyways. So are you solving big problems where you can kind of show up every day? Are you solving niche problems where you want to show up in a bunch of different spots, but where people are going to specifically find it? Those are some questions to ask. And then experimentation and measurement, and like collaboration too with whoever's managing paid and sort of demand gen strategy, to understand, how, even ad costs can kind of give insight into what platforms are working, where people are engaged. And then, next step too is to look beyond that and go, what other publishers, communities, platforms, again, can I get more directly into, leverage developer relations, or, some SparkToro research and find some influencers. Yeah, I think, again, with this whole phase of like, what is SEO and how much do we value that? But also, I think, what is social, in different contexts. I think if you think of in the B2B space, LinkedIn, I've seen it work and not work for similar companies. So there's still some mystery there. And then as your buying group gets larger, it's a bigger mix of where do you go. So make sure that the buying group is there, not just your competitors, I should say, or not just chatter about it, but make sure the buying group is actually there. And that should really help understand.
Now, this is going to be more on the art side of things than the science, I would imagine. But, the goal of content is eventually, it's not just altruistic, let me educate you. It's how do I get a conversion to a certain extent, right? How do you craft content in a way? I guess there's two ways of thinking about this. Do you craft content in a way to convert, whether that's a CTA on the bottom or whatever, mention yourself in a blog, which you can't do on all of them? Or is it more about repetition and just getting in front of them 100 times so that eventually they're like, oh, wait, what the hell does this company do? What's your thought about how to get that conversion?
Yeah, I do feel, maybe even more recently, more in the latter camp of inspire the hand raiser, as opposed to like compel a click, so yeah. And I think, those leads are much more valuable in an age where it's harder to like measure impressions and attribution and engagement. There's value there too, to say we almost left this person alone until they raised their hands, but we can tell that we inspired them a lot, and then kind of go back and understand that, and also make that customer our buddy and help just get live feedback of what worked, because that's probably worth number one on top of everything else. But, think about product messaging, I think, and where that fits, and make it clear, not just necessarily as a call to action, but just as a kind of clear persona driven inspiration, or something that's going to incite some emotion to that specific reader. And even doing this in multiple different ways in a piece. And then your CTA can be another solution, or your CTA can even sort of be an open question, or a CTA to, sort of bring this elsewhere, try to proliferate this through your organization. But there's, I think there's also ways to dangle that carrot of, we've presented this in-depth background, to get to your next step in the journey. We just want you to click through here. And even, our internal linking strategy, kind of how we design our pages, is conversion optimization and thinking about those CTAs. So it's always there, and probably 75% of content we do a specific stuff for CTA, but there's options, especially, maybe towards the thought leadership end of the spectrum, or even the help and how-to end of the spectrum, where it might be like, this content's going to stand on its own. It's so valuable that the call to action is going to come from your and inspire you, or the call to action is kind of happening subliminally, as you've already been called to action, because we kind of planted this message in your head and helped our brand proliferate. So I'd say definitely a mix of kind of classic and maybe a more PR driven approach of that, build that inspiration and that hand raising.
Makes sense. All right, so last question for you, and I know we've been all over the board. I'm using this selfishly because, again, not a content guy. If you were to, so we have listeners that are startups all the way up to enterprise, Facebook, Google, etc. If you were talking to the lower market, the startups, what are the top couple pieces of advice that you would recommend to somebody just getting started with content?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first priority should be answering your customers' questions, or answering the questions you already know are out there. That's the most, I think low effort, high impact type thing you can do. It might not have distribution impact or SEO impact or brand impact, but if you can give direct answers that to those people that are either already a customer and need help or are just at the tipping point and just need these questions answered, start there, create your content there. Those might come from sales who have discovery questions that need context. It might come from customer success team, the product team, even wherever those can be sourced. Putting answers together to those in packages that can say, let's head this off. Let's shorten your buying cycle, which shortens my sales cycle. From there, I think you can also look at, engage your own or your team's capacity and say, what can I do? What can an agency or a partner or a really great writer help me with? But then think about, how do I phrase this? Think of, again, what the highest impact is going to be. And so, for instance, you might look at a competitor and say, I happen to have a very strong opinion in the other direction as this competitor. That's a great one, to go after. Maybe your most, your flashiest or your most attention grabbing points, start there. Whatever's strongest from the business is another one to go. If you haven't clarified your messages or your product philosophies or even some of your persona appeals, there's some stories to tell there that'll help be foundational and help feed growth in other areas. It'll help enable the sales teams. It'll help, supercharge a broader content or SEO or influencer program. It'll do a lot of things. There's typically internal questions or stories to retell that can give you a big spot to start with, to start getting reactions and feedback from, to start repurposing, all of that fun stuff. Because I definitely feel that where, there's probably a million things you could or want to do, but it's about, priorities and budget and bandwidth and, again, filling up that customer queue more quickly, especially important in venture backed or, whatever high growth phase type companies, for sure.
Makes sense. Well, Russell, this is super insightful again for a novice, especially. Everyone says LinkedIn. Where can people reach you?
Yeah, that's the best. LinkedIn is the best. LinkedIn, Russell Wojcik. Also, I encourage you to, check out Liquibase as well and understand the database DevOps space and, kind of what it takes to, as we've talked about here, differentiate, tell tricky messages to weird niches and, understand what it takes to modernize elements of DevOps and other categories that are itching to grow and expand, but really need, people like you and I to bring them to market and educate people and just kind of help tell that story and connect to value. So yeah, that'd be great. And, obviously look for more podcasts as well.
I also think, just to go on top of that, since most of the GTM Secrets listeners are in tech, not all, but majority, I would say, go check out Liquibase, even if you're in marketing, not in DevOps in any way. And just like, you could do with HubSpot or anything else, look at the example of work that you actually do and go see how you're structuring things, etc. I think that's just a great idea. So again,
shoot me your notes too. Marketer to marketer feedback is always great. So tell me if it's great, but tell me if it sucks more. It does. But that message. Yeah, I think, and podcasts like these are great because I think we're all, as marketers and content marketers, finding a strong community, as remote and hybrid and, team dynamics are different within companies. It's great to have these kind of conversations and open those pathways. So yeah, I would love to open more conversations with folks. LinkedIn's usually the best there. But yeah.
Absolutely. Love it. Well, Russell, again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for having me. I look forward to following along.